And I went to call to order this work session of the Monroe County Board of Commissioners. It is June 21st, 2023. And once again, all three commissioners are present here in the Nat U Hill Room. First item of discussion is support for the Brown County Regional Sewer District's proposed expansion. And I believe we have three people here with us today. We have Clint Studebaker, we have Kevin Allen, and Brian Bollock. Although, I guess, what happened to Kevin? Anyway, he's roaming around. So please step up to the mic. Please do identify yourself so that people at home will know who you are. And I did share some of the information with my colleagues that you had shared with me personally last week. May I give a fresh map? Of course, I've got mine still, so bigger ones are always helpful.
A little different though.
Oh, it's different? Okay. Okay.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, so I'll note for the record that we were presented with a map that of the proposed of the Brown County Regional Sewer District has shared with us that shows properties and areas within both Brown County and Monroe County. Now we've got Brian back. Okay, Clint, Mr. Studebaker, sorry.
Clint Studebaker. I currently serve as Vice President of the Brown County Regional Sewer District. So I'm here today to just give you some background, and then our engineering consultants, BLN, will speak specifically to some of the project details, and any questions you might have, we'll just kind of tag team answering those. Very brief history of the Brown County Regional Sewer District. We were originally formed in the early 2000s as the Bean Blossom Sewer District, looking specifically at an issue around Bean Blossom, dealing with septics, and perhaps bringing sewers to the Bean Blossom area. The way our county got set up at that time was there were three operating sewer districts going on in the early 2000s. There was one in Nashville, much larger, the largest of the three, one in Monroe, and then one in Helmsburg. But the rest of the county was unserved by any sort of collective sanitary sewer system. It was all on septics. So county recognized, the commissioners recognized that something specifically would be valuable in the Bean Blossom area for sanitary sewer systems to get people off of septics. The county began to investigate what was going on with regard to their septics and realized that in terms of records, they had a lot of systems that were either very old or not recorded at the health department at all. So a lot of residents with no record of having a septic system up and running. So it looked like the idea of a large area sanitary sewer system would make a lot of sense. That's how it got started. In the kind of the middle teens of 2000, I think it was officially 2015, the Bean Blossom Regional Sewer District was renamed. And at that time, the county, working with IDEM, looked at the whole of Brown County and recognized what we needed to do within the county was provide a regional sewer district that would address the whole of the county and any issues contained therein, except for the operating systems that were already there, Nashville and Monroe. So we renamed ourselves. It became the Brown County RSD, and that's what's now here today. We're a 5-member, all-volunteer board. Our board is made up of a collection of residents of Brown County, including a retired soil scientist, a lawyer that keeps telling me he's about to retire, but isn't. I think he's quite active and enjoying it. We have a builder. We have a member at large that turns out to be an IT engineer with Cummins, and then myself. I'm a retired professional environmental engineer with far too many years of experience behind me. And I should be retired from this, but I'm not. What we are here today to talk to you about is specifically the idea that we as Brown County RSD, recognized the need to continue the sanitary sewer development that we started years ago around Bean Blossom. But we've expanded the idea to follow the corridor of 45 west from Bean Blossom all the way to Lake Lemon. And then we get into, well, Lake Lemon itself is a major receiver of, in fact, a sizable chunk of the watershed that feeds Lake Lemon comes from the Brown County Bean Blossom watershed, all coming into it. Over many years, IDEM has been sampling the streams in Brown County, and IU-SPIA has been sampling the water quality within Lake Lemon itself. We've looked at all those various sets of data and recognized that there's a lot of E. coli coming into Lake Lemon, that on an annual basis, it presents an issue with recreational use, swimming. Sometimes the beaches, in fact, are closed at Lake Lemon because of high levels of E. coli. So we've looked at the western end of this project, being the Lake Lemon area, as a critical point of needing our services. To get the idea of a sanitary sewer system across the board within this State Road 45 corridor, I'll call it, we also recognize that it's not just an issue of collection, but we have to have a form of treatment for that wastewater. We've been working now for a couple of years with the small RSD that's sitting at Helmsburg with it, and it has an existing wastewater treatment plant. We've looked at them as they ought to be a partner in this. We ought to look at the expansion of the Helmsburg RSD wastewater treatment area to receive all of the wastewaters that we would bring from the east Bean Blossom area to the west from Lake Lemon. We've got an agreement with Helmsburg to do just that. They have been developing, kind of in concert or at least in parallel with what we've been developing regarding a preliminary engineering report to look at collecting the wastewater, BCRSD, and treating the wastewater, Helmsburg RSD. Both of those reports are now finished. They are at the Indiana Finance Authority State Revolving Fund for review, the SRF, and they are at the USDA Rural Development Offices for review. We're looking at those two agencies as being our primary funding agencies to bring this project to fruition. Projects, and I'll put plural because Helmsburg is operating in a separate path, but parallel path with us. And all the agencies involved, whether it's funding or review agencies like IDEM or DNR, they all understand that these projects are hand in glove. You can't have one without the other. So that's more or less where we're at today. What we're asking and why we wanted to be here speaking to you is because of the way the RSD is set up, for us to go into Monroe County requires a request from the county to the RSD that we take then to IDEM that says Monroe County would like to see an expansion of the Brown County RSD to assume the responsibility for this territory that's currently under your watch. We'll pass that on to IDEM, who will authorize it, and that allows our Brown County RSD to come in and actually provide those services. As a little quickie background to that, we've talked to the Lake Lemon Conservancy District that has the responsibility for oversight management of the lake, but not for wastewater treatment. That's not part of their Conservancy District. And we've talked to Bloomington Utilities. Same issue, to just make people aware that this is what we will do or try to do through this project if you're in agreement. And so I've kind of rambled on here with trying to get background out here. And I'll just stop with that and answer any questions that might come up before we get into details. Julie, you're going to say something, I can tell.
We met last fall and
Yes.
talked about this at Brown County at the Lake Monroe meeting. And I found it very intriguing and important. But my question is there any way to develop this project further, because this doesn't address the needs of the western portion
Right.
of the lake?
And I guess my honest answer is I wish we could. The issue that we get into at this point in time is just the magnitude of the project, a new project, and the requirement of funding for that based on its magnitude. We're looking at the moment at roughly a $40 million collection project and a $10 million wastewater treatment plant. And that's rough numbers, but it's right order of magnitude. So that's a $50 million plus or minus size project as it sits today. Our next phase of the project looks to expansion, particularly around Lake Lemon, the rest of the lake, because of its population density, water quality, all the issues that kind of bring us to the table today, as well as in Brown County to the north of the existing project boundary, where we go up Railroad Road. There's a couple of large lakes that are heavily populated. And again, the same reason, population density, a collection of people that have expressed need for and desire for sanitary sewer versus try to handle things with septics. So the kind of the phase two of the work that we're looking at would capture what you're asking.
And what is the so two questions then. What is the how are you raising funds for this first phase, and what is the timeline on phase two?
Well, let's do with the first phase first. Phase two won't happen unless phase one occurs.
Right.
And so what we're looking at there is within the state of Indiana, SRF, the State Revolving Fund, is kind of the driver in organizing funding for this kind of infrastructure work. So our effort to date is working through with SRF and through SRF to seek state funding as at both grant level and low interest loan level. Included in an infrastructure type project comes rural development. They also typically fund projects of this type, infrastructure works. And so recognizing the high dollar value of this, both those funding agencies working together is our first source. It's such a large project that we're going to need additional sources of funding. We know that. And we are in the process of talking to additional state funds that might be out there. There's a SWIFT is an acronym for another pot of state monies that go to infrastructure type projects. We know that at the federal level, the bilateral infrastructure law has funding available for infrastructure type projects. So we're trying to bring all of those together under the kind of the guidance of SRF in order to make this project financially doable and affordable to our ratepayers.
Right.
The ratepayers alone cannot finance this project. It's just too large.
Right.
Phase two, from a timing sense, is, I don't know. I want to be very honest, I don't know. That's to be determined. We have so much to do to get the first project in the ground, and as an economically viable project, then to be looking at phase two should put us in a good position to seek additional funds for that phase two work, because we'll have an operating system going in our favor.
And you're okay. So I get that you don't have a deadline. So people would have to pay to hook on. Yes.
Yes.
Right. Okay. But that's not funding the scope of the plant and the main
correct.
Piping and all that. Right. Okay. But I guess my follow-up question then is, are you building the infrastructure in terms of the processing facility and in terms of the pipage to ensure that you could expand with appropriate lift stations and other obviously it's going to be another infrastructure cost.
Right.
But are you building it in this green portion to the point where you could add on the western part of the lake?
Yes, and when we get into the details, Brian can speak to generally
Great.
how that's being approached.
Great.
We recognize, and that's an advantage at this point in time for this kind of project, when there's nothing in the ground yet except Helmsburg small operation itself. Everything else is brand spanking
Right.
new. And that allows us to think in terms of phase 2 and even phase 3 down the road.
Right.
How it would all come together and be compatible with and easily expandable from our initial phase 1 project.
Yeah.
So we definitely have that in mind.
That's great news. I appreciate that, and I absolutely support this. Obviously, for the health of the lake, for the residents that are there, we certainly are appreciative of your work to get us this far, because I know that this takes a lot of planning, and I know that grant money is going to be key for this, federal,
Correct.
state, everything, and I would support signing on a letter. We just need to get the details, the necessary details, which you already have. It looks like Commissioner Githens already has the details. And that's something I'd be willing to do, especially given the potential for hooking on the western part of the lake, those residents in the near future, hopefully near, not far. But I know this is a huge project, and it's not going to be done overnight. So
No,
right.
it isn't. It's been quite an interesting journey to get to this point. And I came out of industry more than anything else. And my view of the world was a little different coming into this project a few years ago in terms of how quickly things could get accomplished. Turns out they don't get accomplished quite as quickly as what I was used to. And so it just takes a lot of perseverance, and it takes a lot of support from people like yourselves, residents in the area, which, by the way, we had a meeting of Lake Lemon residents just last Saturday morning, and it was nicely attended. Roughly 50 people from the lake came, and when asked for a show of hands, how many liked this project idea, I think it was unanimous. When asked how many might come to our public hearing and support the project, again, I didn't see any hands go down, so that was all very favorable. And we know we've had a good deal of interest from around the lake. And we know that the kind of the far western end of the lake is also in the same situation as the eastern end. The eastern end is low, though. It's right there where the Bean Blossom Creek enters the lake, a lot of mud flats, very low lying ground, and a lot of homes that are built in pretty close to the water's edge. So it's it makes perfect sense to capture that right away and then expand as we can.
Questions?
I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for taking this on. It certainly sounds like a huge project, and also your very clear explanation of exactly what it is. I'm actually old enough so that I remember Lake Lemon being our water source.
Yes.
And it was somewhat problematic even back then. But when I see what's happened to the lake since then, it's truly disturbing, in spite of a lot of work that's been done to try to take care of it. So since the condition of the lake is such that I would not really want that to be our main source of drinking water in case of an emergency, I think this makes a whole lot of sense and should definitely be done, and I am very supportive of it.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that you shared with me last week also was that the outflow from the lake actually goes across northern Monroe County. And so there are other people beyond just where the lake is that are impacted by this.
Yeah, and the effort that we're making in Brown captures a sizable portion of the watershed that feeds into Lake Lemon. There's also watershed in Monroe County that feeds into Lake Lemon. And so what we're doing around the lake is, it's a significant improvement, will be a significant improvement to water quality, but it's not entirely. So we're also looking at what else can be done with regard to on-site septic management that's not adjacent to a more densely populated area where a municipal sanitary sewer makes sense. And so there's work to be done in lots of different areas, but this will capture a sizable chunk of it.
Well, and I think too, last week when we spoke, you, and I shared copies of this with my colleagues, that you had done E. coli sampling at the
Yes.
lake. And it wasn't just that sometimes the samples were too numerous to count, but also you did a breakdown of human versus animal waste E. coli sources. And would you share that with the public?
The lake itself gets sampled annually by IUSPIA and has now for several years, maybe as many as 10, perhaps longer. And those are recorded and presented in the annual reports put out by the Lake Lemon Conservancy District. Most of the sampling points that are taken across the lake by IUSPIA do show high levels of E. coli, but they don't define the source. One of the issues that we looked at a couple of years ago was, we know that E. coli is a contaminant getting into the waterways of Bean Blossom Creek, feeding into the lake. That we know. What we did not know was what portion of that level of E. coli is coming from livestock, wildlife, or us. And so we contracted with a consultant that did a couple of things. Properly, we sampled the streams within the county, and then we shipped it off to a laboratory called Scientific Methods near South Bend, who have developed a procedure for analyzing for human versus animal sourced E. coli. That's a relatively new, affordable proposition. It's been around for a while, but difficult to perform. Now it's gotten to the point where we actually can't afford to do a few samples. We had 2 samples that were taken in Bean Blossom Creek in one of its tributaries that showed E. coli from human source ranging from 50 to 94%. Significant number. And we had similar results in 3 other samples in other parts of the county. So we know that we have septic issues, and we know that septic issues then will create human-based E. coli in the stream. And now we know, at least, we're gathering information on a continual basis about just how bad that is, and why this kind of a project will make a significant impact on water quality as it reaches the lake.
I appreciate all that. Does Mr. Bullock or Mr. Allen have anything that you want to add to all this? And then that may spark other
Brian?
questions.
I won't take too much time. I think Clint did a pretty good job of explaining the project. But again, my name is Brian Bullock. I'm a project manager with Beam Longest and Neff. You're probably familiar with our company through road and bridge projects. I work with the Water Resources Department, so I'm on the wet side of things. I work out of our Bloomington office, which is over on the east side, and also a resident of Monroe County. So basically, we did a preliminary engineering report that looked at the entire watershed of the Bean Blossom Creek area. And as was kind of talked about, watersheds don't necessarily follow county lines. So even though we're looking at it for the Brown County Sewer District, a lot of that area is in Monroe County. And as Clint stated, we would love to basically provide sewers all around the lake, and even possibly expand that into the sewer district, or excuse me, into the drainage basin. But funding is just limiting us to what we can take on in the first phase. And one of the reasons we're really looking at the alternative of Helmsburg providing treatment is IDEM has been involved in this project, and that's kind of been their preferred alternative, is anywhere where we can utilize an existing outfall, an existing treatment facility. They would rather see that than putting in an additional treatment plant. And so that's part of the reason why we're looking at Helmsburg, rather than putting something closer to Lake Lemon. And then there's also, obviously, if we can get it a little bit further away from the lake, just from a PR perspective, that is a little bit preferred as well. So the collection system is different than, say, the sewer system here in Bloomington. It's a low pressure sewer system that has grinder pumps at each connection that pump either to larger lift stations or directly to the treatment plant. And as Clint stated, when we did our preliminary design, we included basically all the customers around the lake in that hydraulic evaluation. So the sewer lines, and especially the main lines that are going to Helmsburg, are sized to be able to add those additional customers to the system. There might have to be some pump upgrades in the main lift stations, but all the piping and valves and things like that will be sized to handle future flow. And then the treatment plant in Helmsburg, even though it's not part of our project, what they are proposing can be expanded to add in our other phases. So, and then and you kind of talked about the Lake Lemon being a past water source. It is still considered a backup water source to Lake Monroe. Should there be emergency or should the growth occur that they need additional water resources. But as it stands right now, there's some concerns about actually putting that into production and treatment as well because of the water quality in the lake. So, and the last thing I'll add, just in the discussions with the city of Bloomington, they do not have any sanitary sewer facilities in that general area. So they were not really interested. It's just not cost effective for them to run sewers out to the lake or even to Unionville in that area. So, so I think they were happy to hear that we were coming and getting sewers closer to that area. So I think that's basically all I had. So I appreciate your time.
So if I understood right, also phase 3 might include Unionville. Is that correct?
Definitely could, possibly, especially if that's something that the county is interested in. And we kind of have to, take a look at a number of different factors, but it could be something that in the future phase, whether it's 3 or 4 or what have you, if the need is there, we could look to expand as well.
So what you want from us today is a letter saying that we are in support of this project. Is that correct?
Yes, and then some.
We're just clarifying something with our
Yes.
council. So what else are you saying that you want?
We actually need a request that BCRSD accept the territory expansion into this portion of Monroe County for wastewater treatment. That allows us then to include the Monroe County side of this project in our PER and our submittal for funding and the development of the project. And then down the road for the second phase, the rest of the lake will be in a net project planning.
And that's all contained within that draft letter that you shared.
Yes.
Right.
Ms. Turner King recommends that we do go ahead and make this a formal motion. So I'm going to go ahead and move that we sign on to the support letter to IDEM regarding the expansion of sewer in the Lake Lemon area.
Second.
We've all had a chance to comment here. Is there any public comment on this item? There's one panelist that has a hand raised, Tammy Behrman. Hello.
Hi. Yes, I just happened to get to listen in on this. I'm with the planning department for Monroe County and would appreciate a copy of the map so that we can maybe incorporate this into our draft zoning map and be able to do some planning in the area, because I haven't seen it before. I've heard rumors that there was going to be this expansion, but haven't seen the concrete maps or anything. So if I could get some connection to a contact or someone that could forward that information to our department, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. And I can see this really, especially once phase 1 is done, and then we're thinking about phase 2, which will be very exciting for Monroe County, that it will be important to have this incorporated into our zoning ordinance, because we can make this a requirement for development, and we can ensure that the size of the property no longer has to require septic, that it may change the way that we zone that area in the future, but obviously not immediately. So yeah, and I just ask you to keep us posted on progress and timelines and things like that as well.
Will do.
I'm really
Happily.
excited. I'm really, really excited about the fact that you're doing this and that you brought this to us, that this will benefit so many of our own residents. But I should call for a vote on the, do we have a motion?
I made a motion.
Yes.
Yep, and I
So,
seconded.
yes, okay. It's gotten to be a long morning already. So all those in favor of providing a support letter for the Brown County Regional Sewer District indicate with an aye. Aye. Motion passes.
Aye.
Sorry. Well, we will get your letter signed and to you as quickly as possible then.
Yep. Thank you very much for allowing us to come and present this, and even more so for that motion and approval. Thank you again.
Our pleasure. And thank you for coming over here today. Okay, we have another item on our agenda to discuss before we get to the planning issue. And thank you, Ms. Behrman, also. That was a good comment there, request. Discussion of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. It's my understanding that the County Council has passed on providing the requested $30,000 of the funding that was requested. Is there any comment or question on this?
I have a couple. I think I'm very concerned because we have, to my recollection, already provided additional funding for this particular research project that they're doing. But I could be wrong about that, and so I want information on that. A lot of what's in this funding request are things that the BEDC already does and that we already provide funding for. So I just don't know how to put those things together. And I'm all for economic development. I just don't know what this is getting the community, what the community gains for this. And if I can true this against the existing additional money, so I think we need to put that in our packet, and have Ms. Pearl here to talk us through why this additional funding is needed, what it will actually accomplish beyond what the BEDC already does that we already contribute toward, which other members of the community contribute toward, the city contributes toward, and companies contribute toward. I'm just vetting. I just feel like we need to do some vetting here, and make sure that county taxpayer dollars are bringing some value back to county residents. So that's my request.
Commissioner Jones.
I would second all of that.
So should I invite Ms. Pearl or one of her representatives to join us next week for a discussion of this? And do you want it at a work session or at our regular meeting?
Work sessions.
Okay, I will reach out and invite Ms. Pearl to next week's work session then.
And I just want to make sure that the previous extraneous additional agreements are also included in our packet that we've already done, and just to kind of balance our understanding of what this additional money is for. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm taking notes here.
Never apologize for taking notes.
But I'm slow. Okay, so let's move on to the next item. We have Daniel Brown. I don't know if he's here or if Ms. Behrman is again, from planning to look at ordinance 2023-21 on the Wiley Farm / Fieldstone PUD amendment.
Right, I'll be tackling this one. It's rather complex, and I will say that Daniel Butler, the petitioner's representative, is here as well in case there's any clarifications that are needed. So if you recall last week, I did an introduction of this site, and I'm wondering if you were able to read through much of the packet before this, because then we can maybe jump right into what to include in the ordinance, and then I can do a more formal presentation at the formal work session and present that ordinance properly. So how much of a review would you need, or do you want to just look at language at this point as to what to include in the ordinance? I do have a lot of documents pulled up, so we can, one of the things, as a review, this is the petition site right here. And, there is some floodplain up here. The break of drainage is right about here. So I do know that the MS4 coordinator and drainage coordinator or drainage board kind of looked into this site and how it develops. There is a proposed road network that both staff and the Plan Commission supports, and I can pull up those documents here in a moment. And then there's an ambiguous discussion about use. So there originally was a proposed use for about 3.4 acres to develop here for the purposes of convenient storage. And that would have to be an added use and would also remove multifamily residential off of this portion of the lot if that was to be developed as that. Staff was not supporting this, and it got a no recommendation after several failed motions from the Plan Commission. As a result of them asking for that additional use to be added to this outline plan amendment, there was discussions about density and maybe reducing the residential density that could occur over the rest of the lot here. And so in summary, what was happening at the Plan Commission level was, the applicant and the petitioner were not necessarily interested in having that reduced residential density if they could not have the convenient storage use. And so that's where the failed motion started happening. There was one to send a positive recommendation to add the use and to also have this reduced residential density. It failed. Then there was a recommendation for a negative, recommendation to you all. That also failed. But they were wanting to kind of keep those two together. I will say that from the get-go, planning staff had supported the road network, had supported the reduced residential density, but was not supporting the that use for convenient storage, because we do have in this area, there are allowances to have commercial uses, and we thought maybe this might be the more appropriate area rather than next to some of this residential area back up in here. So that's a very brief summary, but I can pull up any of the other like documents within the staff report to assist. I also have the meeting minutes from the Plan Commission. I also have a draft ordinance for something that I think for sure would be able to be included, which is the road network and all of the conditions that went with it. So maybe it might be helpful for me to just start from within the planning packet. Well, let's see, sorry. Let me get just a small bit of feedback from you all first as to where you think you might like some direction.
I would leave it to my colleagues with how much background information they need after we did receive background information last week. I actually did have a question that came to mind for me late yesterday, so I apologize. But and boy, this is interesting that it came up for me as a question after months and months of talking about this at planning, but it did. Just as a reminder to my colleagues and to anybody who's interested in watching, this is a PUD that we did not write, that the city of Bloomington wrote, because this used to be in the area intended for annexation. So it's like a little gift that keeps on giving. So my question is, if we set the density in this area, is it a maximum density, or is the way this is written, is it a has to be this density? In other words, if we said, you know, no more dense than 2 houses per acre, if we said that, could they do a lower density if they wanted?
I think they could. I think that would be how we would interpret it. It's not a map,
Okay.
but usually developers are wanting to maximize density.
Okay.
And I'll throw the density discussion document here. Hopefully you can see this. Yeah. So tract F is the northernmost part of this property. Tract G was kind of in the middle range, and tract I was down low, where there's tends to be a little more karst features actually. So currently permitted, this is the density that the ordinance allowed. And I think if someone today was able to have a sewer connection, a sewer letter of capacity, we would let them do 184 units or less. Mm-hmm. When the discussion was to add that use to a portion of tract F, we realized the density was going to get kind of thrown out of proportion. So we asked them to propose new densities, and this is what ended up being proposed. And they depicted it in a really nice drawing, which, if you give me a second, I might be able to pull that up. Give me a second to find the petitioner's kind of depiction of what density would look like. So I'm going to just keep throwing, this is why I had to be at my desk today for dual screen purposes. So again, we have tract F up here, tract G, and then tract I, which would be the lower. You can see these like single family residential lots down here, just a handful of those. We have a more medium density in here, and then this was the higher density. And so we asked them to provide this just to prove that should sewer become available to this area, that they could do this density. And if they drew it out with us, also including the road design, and also showing all of the areas that are not considered buildable due to slope, and with regards to all of the karst features that are found kind of in this portion of the property. And so that's where, you know, they were able to come up with these proposed densities.
So, and again, just for edification, this is a situation where the city of Bloomington is saying we're not expanding sewer to residential areas outside the city. Everybody take note, because if you ask for dense housing, it needs sewer. But there is another option. First of all, that's the opinion of the city at this moment. We don't know what the opinion of the city will be beginning in 2024. So that's my concern, is acting based on current situations, when 6 months from now, things may be very different at the City of Bloomington Utilities. So the other thing I will say is that package plants are also an option, as we just saw today. And so who knows if the petitioner has explored this option. It may reduce the housing a little bit, but it is another option that they could utilize. So I wanted to throw that out there, just so everybody's following what we're talking about. For me, I would like to see, and I think that's where we're at, is talking about what we want to see at the next meeting, whenever that is that we actually hear this formally. For me, what I would like to see is a discussion of the roadway. I would like to see the storage units as a separate ordinance. I would like to see the reduced density as part of this as well. Even though they asked for this as a package, I would like to see that as a separate potential ordinance to consider.
Okay, so I want to just make sure that I am clear. So I have currently drafted one ordinance that really just deals with the road and how that would impact the outline plan. Also has the conditions of approval that the Plan Commission had forwarded to you that were staff recommended. So this would be one separate ordinance that I could do as like 2023-21A, Part A, possibly. And then that one could be considered separate from a different one where, let me pull up staff report. So in the staff report, this might be the easier way to, so this first portion here, if you can read this was that first ordinance that I just showed you that deals with the road and the buffer yard and the open space.
Right.
The second, and this was a no recommendation from the Plan Commission, but it was for changing the housing densities of tract F, G, and I with these three conditions here. Would you want that? And of course, we would then supply that table of the densities for each of those tracts that could be incorporated as an outline plan amendment. We could add that as a separate ordinance as Part B. And then we have also Part C would be the adding convenient storage to tract F, and that would be solely to 3.34 acres as proposed by the petitioner. And then we had also said that if this was to be an approved use, that staff had asked that there be a condition added. I don't think, because this was a no recommendation, none of these conditions necessarily were like approved by the Plan Commission. It would maybe have to go back. Possibly, I'd want to talk to Dave Schilling about that because of the no recommendation that it got for these.
Yeah, I would say I would make sure that all the conditions are added to each. I agree with 3. I don't know if my colleagues want something different. They might want something else broken out besides, but I like the 3 that are here. But just to ensure that the conditions that planning staff recommend be added to each of them, to make sure that we always have the drainage board, stormwater, etc.
Right,
added.
and I'll just throw in, because this one was subject to drainage board comments and compliance with their ordinance, this is the discussion down here about what they had discussed at April 5th, and I would include all of that likely in the ordinance as conditions. So we don't lose them going forward. I want to include all of these. Because we are dealing with a critical watershed. This is in the Cape Creek Sinking Creek water, or it's the Cave Creek watershed, but that ends in a terminal sinkhole. So we do kind of take this area seriously with how we develop it with drainage concerns.
Go ahead.
I agree with that plan for the ordinances. I have other questions and comments, but I can wait until it actually comes to us for a decision.
Okay.
So, couple questions from me. With the drainage issue, I know that stormwater's had problems in the past, especially with detention ponds, and whether or not how that gets written into HOA kind of agreements, or I'm not sure.
Right.
And so how I would want to have that very, very firmly in here. I agree that this should be 3 separate things, but as we look at whether or not the convenience storage goes into place, I want to make sure that I want to know about the density on tract F with and without the convenience storage.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Now that would just be an extension of adding, I'm going to scroll down this table, because we did do the 2.06 units per acre. So I could, do a little math and include what that 3.34 acres, how many units that would add to that petition there. So, okay. I'll include that in the presentation.
Yeah, I mean, if the petitioner chooses to put in a package plan of some sort, that may impact also the density that goes into there. So
I think, as long as they're maintaining this density here, I think is maybe what we're more concerned about. Yeah, they may have to eliminate some of those units to accommodate either bioretention or maybe that wastewater packaging facility.
Yeah, I think it'll be important to make sure that the units per acre is on this, but maybe a range of the number of potential units could be added instead of just a set number. Would that be better? 38 to 42 units, or would you rather just see it as?
This is what we would have if we have the convenience storage,
And this is
and then
what
what
it
we
is
base
without.
without.
Okay.
Is that
Okay.
Makes sense?
But it also might change because they may want to do a package plan.
right?
So, okay.
But then that should be taken into account and the petitioner would have to.
They would
Include
lower
that.
the number of units. Okay. Got
Right.
it. Thank you.
I think I understand that. This is being recorded, so I can always kick back and listen to this later, which will be helpful. So then, does anyone else have any other questions?
I was just going to say, when do we want to hear this? Do we want to
So-
give you all a couple of extra weeks now? We won't be here on
Here's my
July
handy
the-
calendar.
Yeah. You already know we're not
So-
here on July the 12th, so.
Yeah, and I calculated the date is August 14th, which would be our 90-day mark, which is, we don't want to run into that due to state statutes and such. So I think the 28th might be a little bit too soon. I might be able to pull that off and get something filed by this Friday, right? Or we would maybe July 19th.
I think it depends on how much you want to tear your hair out over the next 2 days, but I'm not going to speak for my colleagues.
I'm okay with any of the dates that work for you. How about that?
I'll choose the 19th. That'll give me a moment to make sure I'm clear, and if I have a follow-up
That's good.
question, I might be able to come to the office hours just to clarify, make sure that I'm presenting the correct documents. So,
Okay, and that'll that if we bring it back July 19th, if you have questions following all this discussion today, that'll give you a time too to reach back out.
Yes.
Great. Okay. This is a
and
very
I'll-
complicated one.
Right. Yeah. And I'll consult with their petitioner's representative, Daniel Butler, to make sure he understands and they can have some knowledge as to what's going to be presented at the meeting on July 19th.
Thank you, Ms. Behrman. We don't have anything else on our agenda, do we, Ms. Turner King? Great. With that, we will adjourn this meeting. Sorry, did I wake you up? No. With that, we will adjourn this meeting, and we'll see you all back here next week on June 28th. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.